Welcome back, you guys. Today we're talking about breaking through the dreaded brick wall in family history research. Many people give up after hitting their first brick wall in African American genealogy research. But today I am going to go over a few tips to help you conquer that brick wall and maybe make some amazing discoveries. But first, let's talk about what a brick wall actually is, okay? A brick wall is very simple. It's a research question or problem that you just can't answer or solve. The thing with a brick wall, though, is that it's usually a very persistent and frustrating roadblock. Because that's what it is. It's a roadblock. It blocks you from continuing. So this could look like anything from having a missing relative or missing documentation. Let me give you an example of what a missing relative is. Let's say you found your great great grandfather in the 1930 census. And then you looked in the 1920 census and you can't find your grandfather at all. But you know your grandfather was like 50 years old in 19, or great grandfather was like 50 years old in 1930. So he should have been somewhere on the 1920 census. And you've looked and you've looked and you've looked and you just can't find that person. That's a brick wall. Brick walls can last a really long time. They can go for a week, months, years, whatever. They're just very difficult research questions or problems that you just can't solve with documentation. So that is what a brick wall is. Let's talk about those tips though. How do you actually work past a brick wall? So here are I think I have 5 of them. Here are my 5 best tips for working through or over or past a brick wall. Tip number 1, research extended families and neighbors. Guys, this could be a gold mine of information. What this really means is research the people around your ancestors in a place where you were able to find them. And then if you can't find your specific ancestor in another year or another document, research the people who were around them in that place you were able to find. Research those same people in the location and time period where you can't find your ancestor. You will be surprised what you may uncover if you do that, especially in African American genealogy, because a lot of times our families lived in clusters. So a lot of people around a family unit were somehow connected to the family unit, and you may not even have known that. They could be in-laws or extended family members or just neighbors who were around for a long time. And that's just kind of the nature of our history as African Americans. So it's really important to look at your extended families and neighbors. If you've come across a brick wall, that could give you a lot of information. I have made my own discoveries by tracing extended families and neighbors for some of my ancestors. And so that's one of my top tips. Tip number 2 is location tracking. So you can call this migrations, whatever, but it is really to, or the intent with location tracking is to start looking at the locations of your ancestors and figuring out how they migrated through the years and then following those locations, right? So let's say you're struggling to find an ancestor in a census record. I'm going to go back to that same ancestor I referenced in 1920 in the example at the beginning of this video. Let's say you're looking for your great-great-grandfather and you found them in the 1930 census, but not in the 1920 census, but you did find your great-great-grandfather in the 1910 census. And you're trying to figure out what's going on. Why can't I find this person in 1920? It's like they've disappeared. Well, what could help you is if you look at their location in 1910 and then their location in 1930, that could give you some information about what your ancestor was actually doing. So, for example, maybe your grandfather lived in one place in 1910, and then in 1930 they lived somewhere else, which would indicate there was some type of migration, and you may not have known that. So knowing where your ancestor lived and how they moved through locations through time can open up a wide range of documentation and records that you can start looking into. So that is my second tip for navigating past brick walls. Don't underestimate location tracking. Definitely research locations. Also, before getting off this tip, I want to mention you can research the location in general. So, let's say your ancestor didn't move, right? The same person, use the same example. Let's say you found them in 1910 and 1930 and they lived in the same place. Well, they probably didn't move in 1920. You know, logic kind of says that. They could have, but they probably didn't. So you still need to find them in 1920. If you research just that location, you can actually find a lot of different records that may show you information about your ancestor. An example of this is looking at school records. School records tend to be organized by location, not student name. So, if you research schools in a specific location, you may be able to find information about your ancestor in school records. Church records are very similar. Other social records like social clubs, Freemason records, things like that are typically first organized by location instead of being organized by name, right? So don't underestimate doing general location research. So that's my second tip for getting past brick walls. My third tip is to revisit oral history, especially when combined with historical records. This is especially important with African American genealogy because a lot of our documentation and formal records is just not available due to inconsistent records, the way we were considered as citizens or not citizens, or whatever the case may be in different parts of our history with the United States. So our records for African American ancestors, after you get past a certain point, they become pretty sparse, just being honest with you. So we have to rely on oral history a lot when we're doing research. So your goal with oral history should be to try and find documentation around your stories, but don't dismiss them. Use them to help you research, use them to help you get past those brick walls. An example of this is I was doing in my own family, I was doing some ancestry research about a great grandfather. And I ran into a roadblock. Maybe it lasted maybe 10 years. It was a really tough roadblock. It was a really tough brick wall. And I just didn't know, where to look or what to do. I had tried all my strategies and nothing really worked. And then I remembered a conversation just out of the blue. I remembered a conversation that I had with a great aunt. And she told me that her husband's father, who I believe would have, that's basically the person I was looking for, that her husband's father had gotten a divorce. And it was a very contentious divorce, and the wife just abandoned the family, and she left and went back home, and she left all these kids because I think they had like 16 kids or something, and he had to raise all these kids. And she went on to tell me about his life, and he was a preacher and all that good stuff. And I was like, okay, I kind of remember that story. um, and it just struck me that getting an official divorce in the African American community wasn't very common during this time frame I was looking at, which was like 1900, 1904. And I was like, okay, hmm. So, what I decided to do was to go to the courthouse in that particular area because I was fortunate enough to still live in the area where my ancestor would have filed for divorce. And I looked at really old probate records to go through early divorce records. And guys, I was able to find the entire divorce case. And yes, it was just as contentious as my great aunt actually described. And so that was a case where I had to go back to an oral history that honestly sounded a little bit far-fetched, truthfully, when it was shared with me, but I was able to go back to the oral history and reference it and then combine that with additional historical research, and I was able to legitimize that story. But more than that, by finding those divorce papers and reading through the divorce testimonies and the witness testimonies, it actually confirmed where that family originated from. Um, because I didn't know that, right? Because I mean, they're getting a divorce in 1904. These people had been born during slavery, truthfully, because they were kind of older. And so I had no idea before seeing this divorce record where their home county was. I obviously knew the state because I still lived there, but I didn't know their home county. And that information was shared in the witness documentation because some of the witnesses were actually still in that county. So don't ignore oral history, you guys. It could be a great way that you go over or get past or go through those brick walls. So my next tip, along with oral history, talking about historical records, my next tip is to use alternative databases and records. For example, court records. So just like the story I just shared with you, census records are not the only records that are available, and they are not the only records that have documentation of African Americans. In some cases, even during slavery. So actually, especially during slavery, because if your ancestors were slaves, and a lot of African Americans now have ancestors who were slaves, they were considered property, not people. So to find records on property, you typically would look in court records, probate records, land records, transactions, things like that. So when you run across a brick wall, whether it's during slavery or afterward, do not forget your alternative records, things like court records, land records, all type of military records. There's so many other records beyond census records, right? Marriage records, death records, all types of records that are available to you. So just make sure that you expand your search into some of those alternative databases. And then last but not least, I want to say my top tip for you, tip number 5, is to organize and track your research, you guys. I can't tell you how important that is. What you find today, what you see today, may not make sense. But 6 months later, when you're continuing that research, you may find another little piece of that puzzle that you can go back and link to what you found 6 months earlier. And now you're getting a better picture of what you're looking for. And when you start to do that, you start to get over those brick walls really fast because you're not losing track of your research. You're keeping track of your research. You're keeping it organized because you're not going to find everything in one sitting. It's just nobody does that. Research is something that takes time. It is a process. So you want to make sure that you're well organized in that process so that you can put the pieces of the puzzle together. Otherwise, you're just going to have pieces of the puzzle spread out everywhere and you're never going to make connections. So make sure that you keep your work and your research organized. Along those lines, at History Rooted, we offer a great organizational tool. Check out our website, historyrooted.com, and see what organizational tools we have. Some are free, some are organizational workbooks. Check us out. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Those are my tips for breaking through the brick wall, and I hope you guys found this video helpful. Feel free to leave general research questions down below or comments. And I try to respond to as many comments as possible. And don't forget, check out our website, historyrooted.com. We also have a free getting started guide that you can just get for signing up. The link is down below in the description. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope you have a great time researching.